Take a second to think about your favorite story. Where does the main character start, and where do they end up by the end of the story? At first glance, you might assume that plot and characters work independently, but often they work hand in hand. Characters' decisions drive the plot forward, and then in return, the plot shapes the character's development. A core aspect of storytelling is character development, and one of the most common forms of that development is growing up. So much so that an entire genre of movies, coming-of-age films, was built around that premise. Part of the reason coming-of-age films resonate so much with audiences is because everyone can relate. It's a universal experience. But what happens when a character grows up in a world that's recently fallen apart? It's easy to think about what you might do in a zombie apocalypse. I actually think it's the most common theoretical question I got asked when I was a kid, and that prompts an interesting question. What would it be like to go from the civilization we know now to one that's completely different, one that's fallen apart? And while making that transition would be hard, think about the next generation. Think about those who grew up with the remnants of our last society and culture, a figment of imagination, piecemealed together by stories, writing, and the ruins surrounding them. I've argued in my previous videos that The Last of Us is an exploration of the human condition, and a crucial element of the human condition is growing up, learning. The Last of Us creates a beautiful juxtaposition between Ellie, who grew up in a post-apocalyptic world, and Joel, traumatized by the transition from the old world to the new. This story is a little bit like a chemical reaction. Independent, they don't influence one another, but when put together, suddenly we see change. But today we're going to focus on one aspect of this story, Ellie growing up. Spoiler warning up till episode 7 of The Last of Us. Part of the reason I wanted to make a video on this topic is because there were multiple parts of episode 6 I didn't get an opportunity to include in my other video. Ellie being given a diva cup and the introduction of the native couple in the beginning were great writing decisions. These choices answer some unique questions that might not come to mind when you first think about a zombie apocalypse. But it also prompted a really interesting question. How might these interactions impact the way Ellie develops, the way she matures? Because in the story so far, there's been no shortage of trauma Ellie's had to experience. For example, if we look at the way Sarah reacted to Joel's violence in episode 1 and juxtapose it to the way Ellie reacts to Joel's violence, you can see a stark difference. It's simple. Ellie grew up in a violent world. She shared her biggest fear, ending up alone again. Everyone she's loved has either left her or died. So we saw her fight in episode 6 not to let Joel abandon her, to keep him in her life. But that's why this opening scene is so interesting. Joel's convinced he's gonna die. He literally pushes her away. Ellie covers him with his own jacket, like a parent tucking in a child. She gets up, and before she leaves, she turns and faces him. So much is said without a single word, and you can see Ellie's reluctance to leave Joel. Ellie walks up the stairs, left with a decision. Take the easy way, or fight? And before we get an answer, suddenly we're in her past, exploring another story, another relationship. Quickly, we're given a bunch of information. Ellie's in Fedra school, her best friend's missing, and when another girl uses this information of her missing best friend to provoke Ellie, it ends in her getting stitches. We'll come back to that part later. Then her friend Riley returns in the middle of the night. It turns out she's joined the rebellion, but she has a surprise for Ellie, an adventure into the past. Something I've noticed about The Last of Us is because people are enjoying it so much, viewers are very protective over the pacing. Because we only have an hour each week, we want every second to be worth it. Bella Ramsey and Storm Reed, who plays Riley, do a wonderful job making everything feel important. There's this underlying tension throughout the entire episode where we know that this is most likely the way Ellie got bitten. We also know that Riley isn't part of Ellie's life anymore, meaning she either left or she died. Then suddenly we're in this beautiful set, a mall run down and destroyed, as these two kids who never got to experience the world before them get a glimpse of what it used to be like. And something becomes clear. Ellie has some emotions that extend beyond just friendship. And there's this weird balance, a tension, a fear of when is something going to go wrong, but also a hope in this friendship, this relationship. The Last of Us cinematography has very deliberately stayed away from bright colors. It's a post-apocalyptic world. For example, Bill's truck, with its subtle white and blue, pops in comparison to the dirty and muted color palette that the show normally uses. So when we see this merry-go-round and the arcade, it's gorgeous. There's something almost magical about it. Ellie's a very different person in this flashback. While the core of who she is the same, there's this kind of adventurous, rebellious side to her that probably came with growing up in that structured school system. I think this adds a lot of value to the decisions she's made throughout this story, and we can see that kind of retroactively. Desperately wanting a gun in episode 3, and then eventually using it, acknowledging the fact that she had hurt someone before, trying to establish a relationship with Henry and Sam, but also being able to move on after losing them. Her growing up across these episodes, not just in age, but in responsibility. There's a lot of insight we get as we explore this story. And as we step back into this friendship, we get an answer. Riley tells Ellie she's leaving. She's been assigned to the Atlanta QZ, and Ellie storms off before realizing that she wants to spend the time she has left with Riley before she's gone. And that leads to a beautiful moment where they're dancing together, and Ellie expresses her feelings for Riley, and they're requited. It's beautiful, and for a moment I forgot that anxiety that had been present throughout the entire episode, that nervousness, the awareness that something has to go wrong, and that's when it happens. Of course there's infected, and a fight breaks out. Riley and Ellie consistently save one another, until eventually they succeed in taking down the infected, but at what cost? We reveal that Ellie's been bit, which we as the audience knew was going to happen, but then there's a surprise. Riley was also bitten, and the answer we thought we had, that Riley would leave, it turned out to be wrong. And that leads to this beautiful scene where Riley and Ellie accept their fate, and they have a choice to take the easy way or
we just keep going.
And Riley offers Ellie a lesson.
What are you talking about, Riley? It's over.
It will be, but not yet. Whether it's 2 minutes or 2 days, I don't want to give that up.
And if not for that lesson, Ellie wouldn't be here. Bringing us back to our initial question. Does Ellie take the easy way, or does she fight? Ellie was at a crossroads, the smart decision to leave Joel, or the brave one to fight for any time he has left. Because if Riley hadn't made this decision, Ellie wouldn't be here. And so she's forced to grow up.
When they love you too much, now it's fake.